come to order. First agenda item is discussion on the high-speed superconducting magnetic levitation system between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. You want to turn the gain down just a bit, Kevin? Thank you. Okay, well, first up is Kisha A. Brown, Director of Community and External Affairs, and David Henley, Project Director.
Good evening.
You got to hit the mic till the green light comes on.
Press it hard. There you go. You're good.
Action. Good evening, members of the City Council, Council President and Mayor Mo. My name is Kisha Brown. I'm the Director of Community and External Affairs. I'm going to invite David to join me up here. And we usually switch on and off. That way you don't get too bored with one of us speaking. But we're here to give you just a project update. Since the last time I came, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, back in early January, when I was presenting before the council in response to your resolution. So we have a project update that we just want to be able to share with you. And of course, feel free, I guess, if you want to ask questions in the middle, if that's how you would like to proceed, that's fine with us. So just a little background, who we are. So the Baltimore-Washington Rapid Rail is a Maryland-based franchise. And we would be BWRR would be the operator of the train. The Northeast MAGLEV, also American-owned and Maryland-based here, headquartered, was formed to support the promotion of the technology and the deployment of the SMAGLEV in the Northeast Corridor. And then JR Central is the Japanese company who developed the technology, operates the MAGLEV train, as well as their bullet train in Japan. So the question we often get asked is why here, why now? And the Northeast Corridor, as many of you know, is home to a lot of people. We're about 17% of the country's population, while only taking up about 2% of the landmass. So when you look up and down the Northeast Corridor, you've got 24 million jobs in that corridor, and we're looking to connect the workforce with major cities, major airports, and create a more intimate region, if you will, by having the MAGLEV connect up and down the East Coast. So you already know about the current state, right, of our affairs with infrastructure, whether it's our highways, which here we can always have predictable traffic problems, whether it's our airways, where BWI is very supportive of this. They've been very interested. We've had a lot of conversations with them. For them, it's an opportunity to focus on their short haul flights, and also look at ways that they also begin to connect up and down the East Coast in more direct ways. And then our rail infrastructure, which was never built for high-speed rail, as you know, right? So this Northeast Corridor for the rail, for Amtrak in particular, is its profitable area, but it is sharing it with freight as well as passenger trains. And so it is usually, it causes backlog, it causes slower trains, it causes unfortunate accidents and injuries. And so we look at sort of the current infrastructure as lacking for the future. And so how do we bring in an additional transportation mode that can meet our needs? And so that brings us to using proven technology to do that. And in Japan, the MAGLEV has driven over 1 million miles and has taken over 200,000 passengers. And the Japanese have been working on the SMAGLEV for over 50 years. So they began working on it in 1964. And their full vision is to connect their major cities. So connecting Tokyo with Osaka eventually is the full range of their vision for their SMAGLEV. And so ours is DC to New York in 1 hour. And this first phase that we're working on is DC to Baltimore in 15 minutes, with one stop at BWI Airport. So some of the things, just to give you a background of sort of like what the company has been doing up until now. It's been privately funded for 8 years. No state money has been used thus far. We have an agreement with Japan, with JR Central, the company that I mentioned earlier, to use the technology. So there's an agreement for the technology transfer. And the state portion of the federal funds that we got were paid by BWRR. So right now we are in the process of studying this first phase. And in order to do so, Maryland put forth a grant proposal to the federal government under the Obama administration and was awarded about $27 million for in the MAGLEV deployment grant program. And the match that usually Maryland, the state who was the sponsor, applicant would put forth, BWRR did. So this study that I'm referring to between Washington and Baltimore for 15 minutes is was originally about 40 miles long, 10 miles wide. Where is the best route? What's the best alignment to get you from that north-south region? And then also looking at where exactly would the stations be in Baltimore and DC. So those are also being considered as well. The only station that is definitely known is the one that's at BWI Airport, which would be underground in their terminal. So this FRA process that we're in, which is the NEPA process, the National Environmental Protection Act, it's a federal law, umbrella law, that requires the coordination of over 30 federal, state, and local agencies in order to make sure, trying to make sure that as much as possible, everybody is on the same page as this process develops. And so in the process of creating the environmental impact statement, all of these agencies on some level are included in updates, part of phone calls, meetings, in order to get to the next step. And so our project schedule right now for this environmental impact statement is to complete around mid-2019, which would then potentially lead for construction to start in late 2020. This is as the schedule is now that the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, and the Maryland Transit Administration are conducting. So I'm going to turn it over to David so that a new voice comes in and you're refreshed, but we'll talk a little bit about the alignment.
So as Kisha mentioned, there is an EIS being undertaken independently of us. There were several alignments that were initially identified and have gone through various processes and screening efforts to the result that we have today, which is 2 remaining alignments, both of which straddle the Parkway, the BW Parkway, one on the east and one on the west. Okay, so the area that I'm going to concentrate on here tonight is the viaduct section, which is most high profile for this area. So the actual total length of the alignment is 40 miles, and about 75% of that's going to be in tunnel. So the balance is the section here for about 10 miles or so, going from an area just north of Greenbelt to an area just north of Fort Meade area. And this is the alignment as you will see in the EIS website. However, it's not a static situation. There are, let's see, do we have, okay, sorry. Okay, this is the South Laurel area. So this is an area that I think is most applicable. What I need to tell you is that in October, pencils down, we need to publish what the alignment's going to look like. That doesn't mean it's fixed in stone. So the effort right now is to identify those areas on the east side and the west side that are impactful. Now on the east side, we're impacting federal lands, the National Park Service's BW Parkway right-of-way, at the edge of the Patuxent. There's Fort Meade, there's NSA, NASA, those areas there. All folks that have been informed and have provided comments to us. but no fatal flaws as of yet. On the west side, we track along just the edge of the right-of-way, but not in the right-of-way for National Park Service. And there are impacts on residences in a couple of locations, South Laurel, Montpelier, a couple of different locations along that section. So mindful of those, the attempt now is to work with the environmental impact firm, AECOM and the MTA, to shift that alignment to the extent possible as far away from those homes as you can. Shifting that alignment puts us into National Park Service right away, so it's not an easy trade-off, but we need to work with the National Park Service to have them understand what those trade-offs are on both sides. So those discussions are going forward. In terms of the economic benefits, there's going to be the benefits during construction, 74,000 jobs for Maryland. Across the country, 205,000 jobs. Those are the jobs that will, we think, hopefully provide some avenue of career advancement for citizens in this area, hopefully, and we'll work with the local educational institutions, universities, et cetera, to come up with curriculums, programs that can best structure a pathway, a guideway into those jobs. And these are the kinds of jobs we're talking about. So a full range of construction, engineering, maintenance, operations, stations, facilities, jobs of every skill set, from the most technical, technology-driven jobs to people walking the right-of-way and inspecting and maintaining. Recently, as part of our campaign to ensure that jobs focus in this state, we signed an agreement with NABDU, which is the Building and Trades Union for this area, very, very strong, that will support us during the construction process. We talked about benefits before, and these are the benefits of a lot of cars off the road. The more cars off the road, which we hope to have as a source of our ridership, the less we're going to be spilling poisonous gases into the environment, which we all don't want to breathe. Other expected environmental benefits include less highway congestion, reduced need for short-haul flights. A large part of the Washington, D.C. and New York market is dependent on airplane flights between the two cities, which is only a couple of hundred miles. In Europe, in Japan, you wouldn't think of traveling that way. You just take a train. And if you have a train, you can. Reduce fuel consumption from less cars traveling. So all of those issues under less cars traveled are what we're seeking to capture. In terms of what it looks like, well, 75% of it you won't see. It'll be underground and deep underground, probably 50 to 80 to 100 feet, depending on where it is. It's about 50 feet wide. Viaduct section stands about 18 feet. Those footings are obviously much narrower, so that's the discussion we're going to be having with the Parks Department to have them understand what the impact locally may be and work with the EIS team to come up with mitigation strategies to either mitigate or avoid those impacts. In terms of noise, this is a technology in which basically you're flying. You start off just like a plane, and then after 90 miles per hour, you're airborne. And so by the time you leave DC, or by the time you leave Baltimore, you're flying into your next stop, and next stop is BWI. Okay, so in terms of noise, from the tunnel point of view, obviously you're not going to hear it. Now, viaduct section, there is air displacement noise, speeding train going by. We're going to meet Maryland State standards in terms of noise, which may mean putting up noise abatements if necessary. We don't think by the end of the day, if it is the western alignment that's chosen, that there is going to be a significant amount of impact of noise. In terms of vibration, electromagnetic vibration, I think in terms of, as I mentioned, you're flying, that's not causing vibration. That's the operation. So I think in terms of the operation, we have nothing to worry about in terms of vibration. However, we may all want to discuss vibrations during construction. This is tunnel boring machine. There's going to be at least 5 of them. Now, they're going to be 50 to 80 feet down. And I don't know if you've ever seen videos of a tunnel boring machine, but I can send you a link. It's fascinating. It's like its own city underground. It's digging, it's pulling the dirt out on conveyor belts. At the same time, precast concrete panels are being put in at the same time so that the tunnel is formed just as it's being dug. Okay, so I'm not saying there's going to be vibrations during that operation. It's become very, very sophisticated, but I know a lot of people are concerned about that. So if there is a concern about that, we can work with the local property owners to address whatever needs they have. We can have a communication program. We can do monitoring, sensitive equipment that will detect any vibration. We'll shut the job down if there is, but I don't expect that there will be. Tunnel boring machines are used all over the world in the most sensitive areas, including London, New York, places that are heavily built environments, and they've been successful in their operation. EMF, de minimis impact, according to the studies in Japan, where the EIS is completed, so it's well below world health standard. I'm going to turn it over to you now for fact versus fiction.
So this is the last slide, but we included just because there's a lot of misinformation out there about the project, and we were very appreciative to the Laurel Council and the mayor for inviting us here to be able to have a conversation and talk about it and answer any questions in depth. And so, some things that people talk about, and a lot of these are based off of very serious concerns that we take very seriously, which is why we want to be able to address them, not based on fear, but based off of fact and how we can meet the concerns of your constituents. And so with that, I will open it up if there are any questions.
You talked about this tunnel. The train is going to be 50, 80 to 100 feet underground. Can you tell me about the escape routes? I mean, in the event of an emergency, how would people get out of there?
Yeah, as part of the FRA is Federal Railroad Administration, they have something called the Rule of Particular Applicability, which is the guideline for how the operation will work. There is not an SMAGLEV operation, so that has to be developed. And as part of that, emergency preparedness, escape, what to do in emergencies, all of that is going to be defined and documented, and we'll work with emergency preparedness representatives all up and down the corridor to have them understand. But in terms of what that exactly is going to turn out, it hasn't started yet.
So you don't have any idea how many feet apart or how many?
Not really, no.
But you will have some.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, you were moving a little too fast for me, the career opportunities. Yes. You said construction, engineering, facilities, operation. What were the other two?
Yeah, so here's the slide.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is one of the areas where we look forward to having long-lasting partnerships with communities, and especially several of our higher education institutions in the state. And so when we think about preparing sort of the future, not just to ride this train, but to be local participants in the development and working in the control center and so forth, we look at, logistics and not just, I'm going to work at the ticket booth, which is important in itself, but that there will be careers developed when you have the fastest train in the world, which in Japan operates without injury or fatality associated with their trains in the entire years of their operation, that same standard of excellence would be brought here and expected. And so the high skills that we're going to require is something that we need to be thoughtful about moving forward. How do we make sure that our young people are trained to be able to be involved in the operations and so forth and connect with, whether it's Bowie or Laurel College Center or University of Maryland, so that our kids are then trained to be a part of this opportunity.
And then my last question was, you said you all, they've been privately funded, was it 8 years? 8 years. Okay. Thank you.
You said the closest it's going to get to actually the city of Laurel is South Laurel and Montpelier. I don't know if you guys know the boundaries of Laurel itself, but South Laurel is not in the city, or Montpelier is in the city, so it's going to be away from, it's not going to directly impact the city of Laurel at all, correct? So in 50 years, you said that in Japan, there's never ever been a fatality. What's some of the issues that they have had in those 50 years, other than regular maintenance or issues like that, or what's some of the other things that have occurred during that period of time that might be noticeable to us as far as safety measures?
Well, one thing that gets brought up a lot are earthquakes. And Japan is the land of earthquakes. I'm sorry. Japan is the land of earthquakes. So they've built their system reflective of that. And during an earthquake, a certain level of vibration will just automatically shut down the train system. Now, Maryland has an occasional tremor now and then, something I think approaching 4 in mid last year, right? There it's 7 and 8, which is magnitude difference. That's huge. But we'll be mindful of that and that experience and lessons learned from that. Other than that, in terms of operational, what Kisha was saying is absolutely dead on correct in terms of the culture of operation. That is something we need to bring to this country. It's a whole different work ethic. The on-time performance there, system-wide, all trains, less than a minute of delay. Less than a minute of delay, system-wide. Hundreds of trips, hundreds of trains. Now that's discipline. That's a culture that we need to have in order to make this successful. About 3 weeks ago, I was tickled to see that JRC, this made the news, JRC had to send out a letter of apology. Why? Because a train had left 10 seconds early. How dare they? And they apologize for it. So that's something I admire, and I want to work to make that a reality here.
So this started with 4 projected routes, correct? And you're down to 2 now?
We're down to 2 now. It did start with more than 4. I think during the initial phases, it might have got up to 12, and it got whittled down to 6, and then to now down to 2.
And the environmental impact statement won't be available till mid-2019, correct?
Well, there's different milestones of public participation throughout the life of the EIS. So the record of decision, the final approval, will be mid-2019, but there will be several opportunities along the way, whether it's forums like this or ones that the MTA is present at, to have a discourse about the project and find out about it.
So we're pretty much in the beginning stages of this, per se.
This process started in August 2016, so I'd say we're a little bit closer to halfway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, I currently catch the train to work now. I catch the mock train, the Camden line, and also catch the Greenbelt. What kind of impact will they have on us in this area to use those methods of transportation?
They will be around forever. Amtrak will be around forever. MARC will be around forever. They serve a particular market. We're going to serve a different market. There's plenty of room in this corridor for everybody.
Anything else, Keith?
No,
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to start with just a one-word question. Why? Why do we need to get from Baltimore to D.C. in 15 minutes?
I don't want to answer a question with a question, but it's sort of like, why not, right? And what are we missing out on by not allowing ourselves to think beyond our square mileage, right? And so when we allow ourselves to connect with BWI, Baltimore, Wilmington, Philly International Airport, Philly, Newark International Airport, and up to New York, we expand not just the region to make it more approachable, to make it more connected, but also we expand our own marketplaces. And so some members of the business community, for example, some of their ideas are like, wow, I would be marketing my area to New York or New Jersey where they have high rents and say, hey, we've got plenty of free parking, we've got a MARC local service, we've got plenty of commercial real estate for your liking, come on down, right? You can have the comforts of a suburban, quiet Maryland home while still earning 4 times what you would get in our area in New York City. And so I think about the opportunities that we don't have now, that we don't even realize we don't have because we're not as connected. And so when you do go to other areas of the world, in Europe and in Asia, and they're zipping not even from city to city, but country to country in their bullet trains, which is sort of the older cousin or the great aunt of the MAGLEV train. They usually go around low 200s, like 220 miles per hour. What is it that we here in this country have not even reached our full potential because we're not even connected in ways that would really allow us to reach the next level?
At our current Main Street station and other stations along the Camden line, do you have any data that talks about how many passengers are picked up along that line in that route from Baltimore to D.C.?
So one of the most important aspects of the environmental impact statement that we were referring to is the ridership study, right? And so in that process, there will be a study done to look at who's riding this, who would ride this, right? What's the price point? Where do they live? Why would they ride it? And so kind of putting all that data together to say, is the ridership really there for this? Is this something that can financially survive in this climate, thinking ahead to about 2026, 2027, right? So if we started construction in 2020, you take about 5 to 7 years to build it, and you have a year of that dedicated to testing and making sure everything is up to par. What does it look like in 2026, 2027? And so this ridership study is that estimate that's needed to verify and kind of like move to the next step to say this is something that is financially viable as well as something that meets the needs of what we project for this region.
So we have people who use our Main Street station who come from West Laurel, who come from Howard County to that station, and they depend on the train to take them into work in D.C. There would have to be some alternative transportation, presumably the Camden line perhaps, with some improvements that would continue to service those folks. So I'm just trying to sort out what the two competing trains, and I have to think they would be competing, would benefit. But let me ask, because I know there are other questions to be asked. 1,500 jobs annually is after the construction is completed. Is that 1,500 annually, that's a cap, or is that a growing number? In other words, are 1,500 jobs going to be added annually after construction? How does that?
So I'll let you answer that, but I wanted to just touch on the sort of tail end about the Amtrak service. And so similar to Councilmember Snyder, we believe that, I'm sorry, Sidor, that Amtrak would continue. Right? So the ridership who conveniently, quite frankly, is able to hop on from other neighboring areas here and head into DC will likely not then drive to BWI to then go down to DC, right? Or maybe they will, I don't know. That is a part of the ridership study to be able to see who are these people and where are they coming from, and are the numbers there? So I'll let you hit that.
Yeah, she basically answered what I was going to say, but I will add that the issues associated with Amtrak locally and MARC locally are of critical importance for all of us who live in this area. And to the extent that either more money, state monies, federal monies can be allocated to address the conditions that are paramount for their service, because you look at the statistics, the ridership is going up and up and up, and there's not a lot of extra flexibility in terms of allowance of more trains within that environment. The windows of opportunity are very, very slim because of competing interests. So that's something that is a regional, state, and federal issue, which we all need to be concerned about. Now, going back to the ridership study, it will identify, as Kisha mentioned, who will be our riders, both in this region, but then once we get going up New York, it'll identify that market as well.
Okay. Mr. President, I have just one more point of clarification than anything. If we could go to the last slide, the facts slide. On fact number 2, the notion that property values will decrease is no factual basis. In general, proximity to transit increases. But proximity to transit, at least as I understand it and interpret it, means that there are stops along the way that people are getting on and off, they're shopping, they're residing in places and that sort of thing. This train is blazing through. There are no stops. So how does that, how do you back up that fact?
You're absolutely correct that the closer you are to a station, the more valuable it is. You're absolutely right. And maybe we should clarify that a little bit better. The point of that is that there is shared regional economic benefits that are spin-offs of a train, whether you're 2 blocks from the station or you're 5 miles away from the station, wherever it is, that there are resultant economic consequences that will be beneficial. That's sort of where that's going.
I would even add to David's comment about 5 miles and take it even further, because to be within 10, 15, I would even argue further, miles from the fastest train in the world that is connecting DC to Baltimore and DC to New York, DC to Philly. I think that, the economic value of homes and businesses, it transforms in a way that I think that, we hope that the environmental impact statement and the ridership study will highlight, but that I really think that we haven't even begun to really imagine. I live in College Park, and I think that, 15, 20 years, hopefully then I'll soon be above water, because right now I'm still underwater, but that having a train that's 15 mile, I'm 15 minutes from DC, and now my area can shoot up to, I can get to New York in an hour, or I can get to Philly in a half hour. I think it could not only have great positive consequences for me personally as an individual, but my property values as well.
I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around a train that I understand from point A to point B, but as the train travels through Prince George's County with no stops, I'm just trying to wrap my head around where the economic value for those areas comes into play. I mean, we can go on and on with this, and I know our president has questions as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks a lot, Fred. I'm going to ask a few questions and make a couple of observations, and then I'll let the mayor have his go. I'm reminded about a movie I saw 50 years ago, Fahrenheit 451. The main character got off his monorail, walked down a stairway, and walked to his house. That's how I see transportation enhancing property values. Not this. We've got an Acela train that can't even get up to speed between Baltimore and Washington, and they spent a lot of money improving the Penn line. In fact, it half fell apart yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or whatever. We're lucky nobody got killed. Okay? And I think we need to separate the bullet train in Japan from this. Because it turns out, when I did the research on the initial segment you talk about, it's 30 miles long. And it only runs 40 times a year. Now, my question in my mind is, why is it only running 40 times a year? Because they've got a lot of people that want to get on it and try it. Why is it only running the initial segment 40 times a year? So that's just, not looking for an answer, but that's the observation I made based on the research I had. And I've seen packers in Japan. They don't use them anymore to push the people onto subways and the bullet train at one time, but they've stopped using those. Now, the fact that the train leaves 10 seconds early or 10 seconds late, we're nowhere near that in the United States with the transportation we have. And I'll bring one other thing, because I've been to enough COG meetings where we've talked about it. We've got a metro that can't be maintained, and a lot of the problems are underground. The area here sits in used to be a sea at one time. That's why there's so much clay. And I've seen the boring machines. I was in Boston many, many years ago when they had the boring machines going up there, and you could feel them in the city when they turned those things on, because they're chomping at whatever's down there. I don't know exactly what they were chomping at. But the other thing that came to light with that operation was the costs went way over. They called it the Big Dig for a lot of reasons. In fact, it was so much overruns that they actually exceeded the state allowance for economic development bonds. They didn't get charged, but they did exceed them. Now, so, and what are you, something Mr. Fred said, I'm having trouble getting my arms around, why is Japan willing to make a $5 billion investment? Because I don't see the return based on what you've presented here. Yeah, they'll sell some cars, but I'm just saying that you don't have to respond. Okay. The big impact here is the Greenway, what I call the Greenway. It is a major watershed in the state of Maryland. And I saw the pictures, nice pictures, but there was no trees underneath those things. You don't want trees growing under that stuff. So you're going to clear off all these trees, you're going to build these elevated, for what, 10 miles? You're going to build these elevated tracks, and it's not just the view, it's actually the watershed that's being impacted. Now, I don't think they're going to take that into account. I really don't in the environmental study. But it's important in the state of Maryland because you get out of this area, we got a water problem in the state of Maryland, a shortage of drinking water. Okay, last thing. I've been familiar with what's going on in California with their high-speed rail. Mayor convinced me many, many years ago to get involved in something called the Transportation, Infrastructure, and Services Steering Committee for National League of Cities. And I've had more briefings on that thing, but what I've noticed is, over the last 7 or 8 years, the costs have just gone through the ceiling. Now, I'm not disputing we shouldn't have this. I'm not disputing we shouldn't have Hyperloop. I've looked at that technology too. That's interesting technology. But I think there's been a lot of different things pointed out. I think there's an awful lot of speed bumps you've got in store for you with this, especially when we get down to the real cost of putting this in place. And again, I'm not angry. These are the things I've been looking at since we put this on the agenda a month ago. And with that, you don't have to answer me. Go ahead, Mayor.
Just first, thank you all very much for coming. And David, just a quick question. Actually, I had the opportunity to meet with both last week, I guess it was, regarding my letter I sent and some of my concerns. And they really know where I stand. So if you could switch back, I just had a question that when I saw to the platform, I'll call it one more. Yeah, right there. So I couldn't see, did you say the right-of-way, is that 80 or is it 50 that you talked about on the right-of-way?
The actual right-of-way is 72 feet. The viaduct segment is about this.
So my question is, with the platforms there, you're not going to allow people just to walk under these or go under these. Are these all areas going to be fenced? Are they going to be, how is that?
That's my expectation, that they will be fenced for security purposes.
Okay. That's all I had. We talked, like I said, last week, so I really said it was the council's opportunity to ask questions, so that's really what it's about.
Thank you, council members.
I really do appreciate you coming. This is on our agenda, but it'll probably, we'll have another public hearing, and then we'll probably go another 2 weeks before we vote on it, okay? Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Now we've got the Honorable Dennis Brady from the city of Bowie, and he's going to present the alternative perspective. I like that, alternative perspective. Go ahead, Dennis. You have the floor.
I don't have an alternative per se because I'm not selling anything.
All right.
Mayor Mo, good to see you, Michael. Thank you for this opportunity, and I commend you for looking into this. And to be honest with you, that has been a problem since this thing kicked off. There's been the information coming out from the proponents from the state is woefully inadequate. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until the citizens about this time last year started raising questions and asking things that information started coming out. If you look at it, Mr. Rogers formed the Northeast MAGLEV in 2010. In 14, they applied for the railroad franchise from the old WB&A from the Public Service Commission. Later on, the Federal Railroad posted a notice of funding availability and solicitation for applications for magnetic levitation project, in which this was one of 3 specific projects that were allowed to bid for it. And the end of 15, the PSC awarded the franchise. And then in late 16, they started the NEPA process. And the public knew nothing about this. And in the first phase of the NEPA process, is the scoping phase where you ask the public what are the things that they believe should be included for evaluation, for consideration. And there was almost nobody got any notification, especially no one along the lines. We understand about 600 postcards in Baltimore and about the same number in DC went out, nothing in between, and some flyers were posted, but no real notification. And we got our opposition group started as a result of the April, the first round of open houses where they showed the 6 proposed routes. Previously, they stated they started with 15, they dropped it down to 12, and they actually went to 6 for publication. And 2 of our founding members, Aviva Nadesky and Lori Thompson, went to the Bowie area open house, and they were horrified by the 6 routes. But they were deeply troubled by the fact that only 16 people showed up to the open house. So they came back and they got together and started working, and I was asked to give them some advice and weigh in because of my 22 years experience on the Bowie City Council. And in August, you know what they say about no good deed goes unpunished, in August they made me the leader of their group. So it wasn't something I planned on. I actually had different plans. So our group's effort resulted in the second round of open houses. The one in Bowie had, we estimate, or we're told, that around 800 people showed up. So it went from 16 to 800. Laurel High and Arundel High had anywhere between 500 to 700 people showed up. Remember, compare that to almost nobody at the original round. And I'll tell you, no one I talked to wants it, believes in it, supports it. They're all opposed to it. But I do commend the proponents for attending, for answering questions, although sometimes it seems a little harsh and possibility is a little elevated, but I do commend them for sticking to it. They believe in it, and you know, I commend them for that. I just don't agree with it. Our biggest concern, we started out as NIMBY. We'll proudly announce that what got our attention was a NIMBY, with the potential it had on many houses, any of the 6 routes that were picked. And I do have to commend them that their preferred alternate, and they announced, I don't know if you said they're down to three lines? They're down to 2, okay. I thought you said 3. They announced last week that the Amtrak line to Bowie is off, and it's just the Baltimore Parkway East and West, and their preferred route is the east, and Wayne Rogers said last Thursday that no houses are taken, and that is true. We looked at our information, but there are 12 to 15 businesses that actually will likely be taken. So they have threaded the needle. So we're glad that they are at least responding to the issues we've raised. But our biggest concern, the number one overriding concern, is we don't see that this is economically viable as an entity, and that's what we're concerned about. We researched systems around the world and whether they were studied and scrapped because of this, or whether they were actually built. Germany built a test track. They were going to build from the Munich airport downtown a system. Bavaria and the German government were going to share the cost, and after they built the test track, they determined that it would be too costly to run, and they scrapped the project. And here recently, they just auctioned off all of their equipment because the German technology is identical to what's being done in China, so they have a market for that. And they are deconstructing all those elevated trains that they had. So that's one area that we point to say that it's not economically sound. We question the ridership numbers, and any time you talk about it, when they talk about it, we get a little bit of a different nuance every time they speak to it. And one concern that we have with the NEPA process is an issue called independent utility segmentation. They're constantly throwing out ridership numbers that we believe are their total ridership that what they expect going from Washington to New York. And every time they talk about it, it says, wouldn't it be great to live in Washington and go to New York and work in New York, be a commuter? That'd be awfully expensive if you were a commuter that way. But the project that's under consideration is Washington to Baltimore. And we get the feeling, and the impression is that they are mixing apples and oranges, if you will. They're using the bigger picture to justify the shorter one. The Japanese railroad was actually about 8 or 10 years ago, they were, as reported in their press, they were going to basically drop this whole effort. And the ABBA government stepped in and gave them a loan, and with the stated purpose of creating an export product. And that's what we're seeing here. Somebody asked why. In the NEPA process, you're supposed to give needs and purposes. They've done a great job on the purpose aspect, but we feel they've failed in identifying the need for the system. And what we see is that this is intended, probably the reason why they're getting a sweetheart deal on the loan from the Japanese Bank of Japan, is this is to create a market in this country for the Japanese product. That's what we see. That's what we believe. A concern that we have is noise. And they had a nice little slide that they showed the noise. And our expert who crunched out the numbers based upon the FRA document, 2012 document that they cite, and it's obvious that they're referencing it in that slide, I think it's slide 16. He went back after we got an additional bit of information where they said we're now going to put 3.5 meter sound barriers on the side. So he went back and reanalyzed it, and his numbers for what their train will produce in the way of noise is 10 to 15 dB louder than what they show on that slide, which exceeds the allowable. If you remember that band, there was an orange band, there was the blue one. The blue was there, the orange was the allowable according to the FRA document. They now exceed that according to our calculations. We have some concerns with the noise, and we do have some issues with vibration also. But as I said, the biggest one is economics. You were talking about other projects ballooning in cost. Well, last summer when Mr. Henley presented at Bowie, the number I recall him saying was $10 to $12 billion. And that was when they were talking about 20 to 25% tunneling. Now they're saying it's going to be 70, 75, maybe 80% tunneling, which means the project cost has to have escalated, and it's probably in the order of 15 to 17 billion dollars. So it's already increased significantly. And when you look back, this is the third attempt for MAGLEV. The last time around, the numbers that they were throwing out for the German technology of 2002, 2004 was $2 to $4 billion. So we're seeing an escalation in the cost already. The ticket price is an interesting one because a week or two ago, Mr. Rogers was quoted in, I believe it was the Washington Business Journal, and he said the ticket prices would be $46 to $82. Okay. $46 to $82 annually. Now, if you're assuming it's going to be a commuter riding it at that rate, which means going down to work, coming down from Baltimore to DC or from DC up to Baltimore, 5 days a week, both ways, that translates into approximately $24,000 to $43,000 annual transportation costs just to ride the MAGLEV as a commuter. Now then, if you look at that, nationally, the average household spends approximately 14% of their income on all transportation, not just commuting, but all, which means vacations, weekends, and otherwise. So 14% then says their income needs to be $170,000 to $300,000 in order to be a commuter on this. We look at that, we crunch the numbers, we don't see the numbers supporting their ability to service their debt as well as pay for the operation and maintenance of their system. So we have grave concerns that if it's built and if it's run, that when there is a shortage, the shareholders are going to get paid, the taxpayers will be asked to step in and start subsidizing it, and that's where we're concerned that it becomes a pocketbook issue for everyone. And the last thing I'll touch on, and then I'll answer any questions you may have, but remember, I'm not a proponent. I don't have anything to offer you tonight. I do have a request, though. But I've heard over the last year, they talk about this as being transformational. And it's interesting because when I was a kid, transformational was the flying cars in everybody's garage. You remember those? And I'm sure the Hindenburg was considered transformational until it kind of exploded. And the Titanic, I'm sure, was considered transformational. You get across there without sinking. It was the unsinkable, but guess what happened? And I spent my lifetime in an industry, not directly, but an industry that was, when I was a kid, was touted as being transformational. In nuclear power, we were supposed to get cheap electrical energy from the splitting of the atom. And I spent research time, not at a utility, so that played out. But most notably, remember the supersonic transport, the SST. I recall one of the World Aid concerts they had started in London and ended in New York. And I think it was Phil Collins was the host. And he kicked off the show in London, got on the SST, flew to New York, and was able to close the show in New York for 3 or 4 hours later. And the reason I point to that was transformational. And that kind of relates to this kind of technology. This was something cutting edge, new. But the biggest difference between the SST and this has to do with the fact that the SST utilized existing airport infrastructure. It wasn't anything unique and special and different from everything else. So that it was able to, when they pulled the plug on it, it did not have a negative impact on the existing systems that were in place. So it's just an interesting sidelight, if you will. And then I'll just close and I'll answer any questions, but I'd strongly encourage you to continue looking at it. I think as you look at it, you'll see some of the conclusions that we have, that there's just too many questions about the economics to move forward on this. And when you see that, I hope you'll take a position and join a lot of your other local governments. I hope the county council will adopt a resolution, or at least take a position in opposition to this, because I don't think we really want to put it out there and end up having future taxpayers pick up the burden of this cost. So I thank you for your time.
All right, Dennis, before we get to questions, my wife always reminds me every time I go to a meeting, be nice. Okay? I try to be. She says you look angry, so I'm not angry. But let me just remind everybody that Elon Musk proved yesterday that cars can fly. Okay? And that's why, and I've made a statement, and I truly believe it. He will make Hyperloop work. It won't be in this area. It'll be somewhere around the country, just to show that he can do it. That said, let me move to questions, and let me start at the end. Carl?
Mr. Brady, you said you're with an opposition group. What's the name of that group?
Our group is called the Citizens Against SMAGLEV. That is the name of our Facebook page, and stopthistrain.org is our webpage.
You also said, I'm a little confused on the cost that you gave. You said $46 to $82. Now you said annually right after that.
No, I said annually it amounts.
Okay, so this is $46 to $82 each time you ride the train?
The suggested range of price of tickets, according to the article that was quoting Wayne Rogers, was $46 to $82, somewhere in that range.
Each time you ride it?
Each time you ride, for one-way ticket. And then from there, I escalate that for an annual of $23.9 to $42.6 for annual cost, if you commuted every day at those prices.
Okay, yeah, when I heard you say annually right after that, I thought it was just for the whole year. Okay, so that's one-way ticket to use that.
According to the article, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thanks, Carl. Keith?
Mr. President, I don't have any questions at this time.
All right. Valerie?
I'd like to read the article that you're referring to in the Washington Business Journal. It was yesterday. Was it in there yesterday?
It was a week or two. I can get you the article. I can send it to you. I don't have it with me.
Okay.
Dennis, if you'd send that to Ms. Rao, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anything else, Valerie?
No, that's it.
Fred?
Dennis, good to see you as always. You mentioned noise and vibrations.
Yes.
Are those vibrations and noises construction noise and vibrations? Are they actual operation? You know, when you're measuring that data, are you looking at both?
We did not touch the construction aspect.
Okay.
FRA put out, in 2012, they put out a publication, this publication right here, this is the cover sheet.
I've read that, yeah.
It's called High-Speed Ground Transportation Noise and Vibration Impact Assessment. And it was put out in 2012, and it really dealt with the German technology because it was talking about maglev trains that would go at 250 miles an hour. So we've taken and adjusted that for the higher speed because the calculations really aren't dependent on the 250 mile an hour limit, if you will. We took and looked at vibration and noise based upon an operating train, based upon what guidance is provided in this document. It did not touch on the construction aspect of what vibration and noise would be caused by the tunnel. So we've not looked at that.
And my last question, Dennis, is if you have this information, aside from Japan, where else in the world is this kind of a rail system operating successfully?
There are two that are, one that is operating and one that is in process, or maybe both in China. Both in China are operational? Yes. They're both operational. Two in China, and that's the only ones that we know of, that we've identified.
Okay. But there have been efforts in other countries to do
absolutely. I
this.
think there have been 9 or 12 attempts, or I should say 9 or 12 different projects in this country that they looked at it and they decided it wasn't worth the risk for many reasons. One of them being economics.
Look at this.
Understood.
So I think
Okay.
In its pack, you'll see some info.
In the
Okay,
pack.
great, okay.
You have some questions, Mayor?
Thanks, Dennis.
Stay where you are.
Okay, let me just make an observation.
Sure.
In all fairness, the reason that air travel exploded was business and government. Didn't have to do with me getting on the airplane and going to Hawaii. Okay, and I would believe in my mind, trying to rationalize these high-speed travel, and I've listened to National League of Cities when they've had presentations. There is a thought that there will be reliance upon business and government to use it, a high reliance. And I don't know anybody that rides the Acela in New York, except business or government. That's just I've been in government too long. And I've had to justify some of those tickets because people had to get there for a meeting. And so in my mind, in all fairness, there's a sort of a mix of fares that are going to happen. Because it turns out that on any day I can get a cheaper ticket on an airplane as a private citizen than I can if I work for the government. Because the government, GSA negotiates something, and then we're strapped into that cost. So again, in my mind, I'm trying to rationalize, well, how do we come up paying for this thing? So in all fairness. Okay, the only other thing is, I threw a couple things over the wall. If you want to respond, feel free, send them to Ms. Rao. Maybe I'm wrong in my observations. Perhaps, and I like to be nice. And with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Dennis, thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate your work. We are talking internally about trying to have an open house to let everybody come in and bring their information as well. We'll see what the interest is in the area. We've had several inquiries, so I did want to let you all know about that. But if we do something, we'll let everybody.
We would encourage
Absolutely, yeah.
more information that the citizens can get, the better they are.
Absolutely. So, but I appreciate it. Thank you for coming out.
Again, thanks for everybody, all of you for coming. Appreciate the presentation.
It'll take about a minute.
And let's take about a 3 or 4 minute break.
Let your mics on.
Meeting come back to order. We'll go to agenda item number 2. Consider of a bid recommendation for fleet acquisition, 1 cargo van and 1 paint machine. You have the floor.
Yes, good evening. Yeah, the Department of Public Works had put together this recommendation to purchase a 3/4-ton cargo van for Parks and Recreation to replace a 2005 vehicle that's in the replacement program, and a truck-mounted paint machine that is to replace a 2004 model. Criswell Fleet Services has a state of Maryland contract for the purchase of the Dodge Ram vans, and Kelly Criswell has the government contract for these type of paint machines. Funding is in the CIP replacement program. The Dodge van runs about $23,802, and the paint machine is $76,550. So we're looking to get approval from for the purchase of these 2 items for $100,352.
What's the total? One more time.
$100,352.
Okay. Questions?
Yes. So you said that this purchase will not increase the fleet, so you're replacing something?
Yeah, we had one of the vans that Parks and Recreation was using has been taken out of service because of some mechanical failures. So we've already taken that out of the service.
And can you sell it for parts or anything, or?
I believe right now we've got it down there. Sometimes we do trade-ins if we purchase things from other vendors.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Valerie. Carl?
No questions.
Thank you, appreciate that. Keith?
No question, Mr. President.
Thank you, Fred.
No questions.
Okay, we ready to go with this at our next meeting?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, it'll be on the agenda for the approval of the next meeting. Move to agenda item number 3. Consideration of bid recommendation for plastering. That's white coating, is that correct? Okay, white coating and pool repairs, municipal pool.
That's correct. We started this project last year with keeping with our schedule for re-white coating the pools. The white coating usually lasts anywhere from 7 to 10 years, so we're around the 8-year mark. So this year we are looking at the replacement of the white coating in the main pool, the lap pool, and the wade pool at the municipal pool complex. Last year, as you may remember, we did the Greenview Drive pools and the diving well, as the diving well had significant, some structural damage that had to be repaired. So in addition to the white coating, we're looking at doing some other work at that time, which will include the coping stones and tiles as necessary. And we're going to take the opportunity to upgrade to energy-saving LED lights, as we did with the other pools last year. In fact, this season, we know it's time to white coat because the white coat was actually coming up off the bottom of the main pool. So it was very timely. So we did put out and received six companies actually came to our site presentation, and we received sealed bids from 4 companies that ranged, the proposals ranged from $68,924 up to $85,214. The funding is in the current CIP under major facility maintenance, and after reviewing the proposals, we'd like to recommend we use subcom pools for $68,924 with a 10% contingency for a total of $75,816.40.
All right, just to remind everybody, the white coating, the way that works is they scrape or chip it off.
Correct.
We don't keep building on top of the old stuff.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Questions of Joanne? Valerie, you good?
Yeah. I have a question.
Carl, go ahead.
I see that company's out of Virginia. Have we had any in the past contracted something for a company out of state where, say, things didn't go right? Is it easier to go back with a company that's either close to us or in Maryland, or is there any difficulties that would occur if they're out of state?
We've never had that issue. We've used other companies, and oftentimes their headquarters will be in one place, but we will find that they do work all around the state, and especially pool companies that's fairly specialized. It's not unusual for them to do work, all over the Maryland, Virginia, DC area.
Yeah, the only thing I have is that doing business in Maryland. I mean, it doesn't affect Laurel, but it's it's Maryland over Virginia, and I'd rather, even if it costs an extra, what, $4,000 we're looking at, it's not a huge amount to where if we could get a business in Maryland over Virginia, I would prefer that we used something in Maryland, unless you have a good working relationship with a certain company or something that, and the trust factor of it. But I would have preferred that we use Maryland.
With this company, we have no reason to not trust them. We've
Marty, this is gonna be required bonding anyways, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, Carl, I think what I thought I heard you ask in the beginning was, I guess what I was thinking is you were trying to figure out if something went wrong to get them back to fix it. All of our projects are bonded. We hold the bond until we sign off on it. We do try to get Laurel, what we call the Laurel area, as much as possible. We've changed our bidding process. I guess it's been about a year or 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. It's through a point system. If you're in the Laurel area or you're a minority contractor, those types of things, you get extra points. But a lot of times we just do so many small projects that we do seem to, in some cases, not get in the Laurel area, and in this case, they're going to Virginia with it. So,
Mayor, it'll be bonded locally, but the contract will also be governed under Maryland law.
right.
My only other thing would be, I would prefer, if we spend money, you spend it in Maryland, you don't go out of state. We have Maryland, just to use an analogy for that, we have Maryland Special Olympics that uses a Pennsylvania ski resort for their winter games, which I hope to convince Governor Hogan or somebody to change that back to coming to the WISP in Maryland, which is, it's pretty sad that you have a Maryland Special Olympics having a 3 or 4 day event for Special Olympics Winter Games, and you're going into Pennsylvania and providing them with all that extra revenue in there. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Carl. Keith?
I have any questions, Mr. President? I'm fine.
Thanks a lot. Fred?
I'm fine with this, Mr. President.
Okay, are we ready to go with this at the next Mayor and City Council meeting on the 12th of February? Okay. And let me just add one thing. We do in fact check references, is that correct?
Yes.
As part of the process for the bid reviews? Okay, excellent. All right, so let's be on the agenda. We'll move to agenda item number 4, feasibility study, City of Laurel Pedestrian Trail Pathway. Joanne, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. And before you've hopefully have had the opportunity to take a look at the feasibility study. With the annexation of the Laurel Plaza property, it really presented us the opportunity, because of the easement that we were going to get along the Patuxent, to be able to realize the construction or potential construction of a path that will take us from the existing path at Riverfront Park all the way down to Route 198, with a second phase that will be proposed to take us from the 198 under the bridge over to the Stephen Turney Park and beyond into the Patuxent Green area. But for the purposes of this study, this is really, we took a look at the potential to expand the path underneath Route 1, which I know this has been discussed in the past many times, and that has always been a hurdle. McLaren came out and were able to put together this study that really provided several options. Two of the options we really didn't feel we were interested in going with, or at least was not within our vision. One being the use of existing city streets. We really didn't feel like that really encompassed what we were trying to do in terms of providing a hiker-biker path. If you had to send people back up onto sidewalks and certainly crossing Route 1 on a bicycle or on foot was really not an ideal situation. The next was to use to continue down along the Laurel City limits, or the Laurel City side of the river. But the problem there was the poor topography as you reach the area behind Laurel Fuel. It's very rugged, it's very steep. It would require them to build cantilever bridges that would be very expensive. It would be a steep incline to try and even get onto the path from that particular area. So that really was not an ideal situation that we were looking at as well. So what was proposed, and I believe this is, again, something that was looked at in previous years, was to go with a potential construction of 2 pedestrian bridges, one that would take you go under the bridge and then would take you across the river onto the Howard County side by the racetrack, use the existing racetrack road, and then come back across the river in the Anne Arundel County area to a site just above the American Legion. Obviously, that would require working with both Howard County and Anne Arundel County and the racetrack owners to use their property, though we do believe that this is the building of hiker-biker paths is very desirable for all agencies that could really benefit from this. Then we would continue along all the way down to the Laurel Plaza area, and for this study, we looked at ending the path at right there at the Pizza Hut. We would come back up onto the property there. We felt like that would be a good place to have an entry, maybe some bike racks or park bench that you could enter onto the path fairly easily from that particular point. We're very excited about this. The McLaren has actually done this program in Frederick City. They took the opportunity to use a shared pathway to connect their Waterford and Baker parks. So they have a proven track record of being able to accomplish this goal. So again, you can see the proposed map that we have that shows you where the path would actually run. We'd be looking at a 10-foot size path, though it would not be used for vehicle use. We would need to have vehicle access for maintenance, snow removal. We'd be looking at adding interpretive signage along the way, being there along the wetlands, taking advantage of the beauty of the river. It's a very desirable area. As well, we would be working with IT to create zones for technology for safety and those types of things.
All right, Joanne,
Questions?
let me ask questions. Fred?
To start, Joanne, the two bridge crossings, how are they constructed? That is, will they be constructed? That is, how high will they be off the ground? Will there be any kind of, I presume there'll be railings, but how high, those kinds of general things for safety.
Absolutely. The main point that they wanted to make about these bridges is that they allow the water to run through them. Our bigger concern is really, obviously, safety is a concern, but also impeding the flow of the river. We certainly don't want that to present a problem. They would have railings. They would be constructed and brought on site, and again, fairly similar to what you see in other jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. From the technology, it's certainly been over time the council's interest that parks like Riverfront Park and our other passive parks have adequate lighting as well as features that would allow someone to hit a panic button or something like that and identify their location for any kind of emergency response. Is that something, you mentioned it, but is that, to what extent? I think I'll put it that way.
We've,
Go ahead.
you don't see them in here, but we've looked at them about a year ago. They're very costly. We're still looking around for some others. Requires electricity, requires wireless. Depends on what you get. If you get cameras or directly to the police department. And
I think, Mayor, we did some engineering work in the last couple of months, and I think you'll see something in the CIP for most of Riverfront this year. And we've already got a lot of our parks already have Wi-Fi and cameras now, and I think we're planning on 2 stations with the ability to expand that as money becomes available. But this will be a full electrical, everything. But we do have issues with flooding we still need to discuss.
Right.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Valerie, you have anything?
Yeah, that was one of my questions about the panic buttons, but maybe it's on here and I'm just not seeing it. But what about like rest areas? Like, will there be like seating areas along the way, or?
None of that is presented in this study. Those are all things that once we get to the design portion, the use of benches, where we would determine there would be access points to get on and off the path. Obviously, just one at the beginning and one at the end is not going to work. We would have to have other areas where people could come on and off. The idea is to really, obviously, to use it for recreational purposes, but also for people to be able to get from areas around the city for shopping, for transportation, getting to the MARC station. So we want to be able to make sure that there are places that people can get on and off the path. And again, all of those decisions would be made during the design phase.
It's a path. Once you get on it, you're not supposed to rest.
Well, in that case, will there be water stations? And
I do want to make one comment, just so everybody's aware, Mr. President. As you heard, we're not at that detail yet. This is really going to be a multi-year plan that we'll have to fund. We are looking at trying to get some state funding, possibly. But what I wanted to make sure that the council was aware of what we're looking at doing, make sure there was no issues, because once we set this in motion, like they did Riverfront Park, we're going to be obligated to move some things forward. But a lot of the other things will come as we get into more detail of the actual path and all. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mayor. Keith?
I have a couple of questions. How long would it be, the distance from start to
I
beginning?
believe it's a little over a mile for this portion and 1.3 miles connecting to Riverfront. So it'd be a little over 2.3 miles just to the 198 area. And then, again, we are looking at the next phase, which would be to get under the bridge and over into the Stephen Turney area and beyond into the Tucson Green area.
Okay. My last question, can you ride your bike on it all the way through?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
can? Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Keith. Carl?
So from the one of the bridges over there by Riverfront to the pool, I think is about 1 mile, isn't it? So close?
From one area, from all the way at the tip of behind the pool area, all the way down is like 1.3.
Okay, so then you're adding an additional mile.
Yes.
So that's pretty good. I love it. I think it's fabulous. The only scary part is in phase 2, if it ever comes to be, is crossing that 198 where we've had fatals and everything else, and the traffic coming westbound is just so fast. That's the only scary part I see, but the rest of it looks absolutely fabulous. I would love that.
Thanks, Carl. Let me make a couple of things. First of all, on the map, you'll notice that it says the wetland remediation pond. That was the reclaimed upstream wetlands that the racetrack got permission to do so they could build the new stables. That was approved by, I believe, the Corps of Engineers when they came to the Patuxent River Commission. And where the bridge is right here, it's pretty interesting. Over near the American Legion, there used to be a bridge there.
Absolutely correct.
And I was told that was actually the original location of the Route 1 bridge. okay? Because then it went other places up north of the racetrack. So this is exciting, because down at the southern end, when we get down to as Carl's pointed out, we're a little concerned about 198, crossing 198. But just on the other side of 198, we have, 77 acres?
Yes.
There's an opportunity here to create a real, not just a bike hiker path, but a nature trail behind there. I keep calling it the swampland, but in fact, it's just stagnant water, but it has value to the city.
Well, I will say that the part of the next phase of the study is to actually look at the potential to go under 198 and not over.
It's the only way we're going to do it,
Yes.
is find out a way to do that.
Yeah, and again, the last thing I'm going to say, and I think I'm correct, some of this would be eligible for Project Open Space. Is that correct?
Absolutely, as well as MDOT transportation dollars, the bikeways, lots
Several
of
different resources from the state that could contribute to this. Okay. Mayor, go ahead.
The other thing I did want to point out, about a year ago, I met with County Executive Shue from Anne Arundel County. He's very interested, or at that time he was, and we're going to send a copy of this plan with the cover letter. He's looking to try to do something pathwise that goes into their park areas from that 198 area or Laurel's Path area, possibly over to the parks they have on Brockbridge Road and others. So I think it's got a lot of interest, and hopefully we'll take a copy of this. So council, so long as they don't have any issues, we're going to continue to move forward. This is making sure that you all were aware of it. We'll start putting stuff together for CIP and everything else. But
Well, I'll also add that just like Anne Arundel County, the Howard County, it's very much on their radar as well to be able to connect people to the MARC station was one of their big hurdles. They were actually attempting to use Route 1, and I think they were meeting with some opposition for that. So it really is a wonderful project that could really benefit, the greater Laurel area.
Okay, Joanne, we look forward to your next report. So when you have additional information, bring it forth. Okay, is there
we have no issues. We're moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, does anybody have any problem with moving forward with this? I see everybody shaking their head, no problems. Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Anything else to come before the council? Meeting's adjourned.